Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Tuesday morning message, and we are still in search of a really good title. So if you've got some suggestions, help us out as we try to figure out what to call this weekly scripture, conversation, formation, session. That's kind of a kludgy title, isn't it? But today's topic is something that we have done actually before, but it's been a while. The title of today's program is Embracing Evangelism. Now, if that title sounds familiar to you, it should, because it's something that we have done here at Epiphany back in late summer, early fall of last year, in the midst of all the COVID craziness that we were going through. We came across this program that was put out as a joint venture between the National Church and Virginia Theological Seminary, one of our fine seminaries. They put together this program called Embracing Evangelism, and a whole group of us got together on Zoom and went through the multi-week conversation. There was some video components to it. There was a lot of really good dialogue about what it means to be an Episcopal evangelist. And if you're thinking that that's an oxymoron, my friends, it's not. Let me assure you of that. But since it's been a while, and since we find ourselves in an opening world where COVID is still with us, but is starting to become less of a factor on a daily basis, we see that we are probably called to share the good news now more than at any time in our lives. And we have that opportunity in new and different ways, primarily because of what COVID has done to change the world. So I thought it would make some sense if we spent some time together just reviewing what evangelism is in our context and how that might work for each of us. Here's the definition of evangelism that they put together. Episcopal evangelism is the spiritual practice through which we seek, name, and celebrate Jesus' loving presence in the stories of all people, and then invite everyone to more. Let me give you that one more time. Episcopal evangelism is the spiritual practice through which we seek, name, and celebrate Jesus' loving presence in the stories of all people, and then invite everyone to more. I kind of like that. There's a lot there.
I think this is particularly well-timed. Of course, it's always a good time to get closer to God. But that said, there are times when there's a greater hunger, and like any other thing, there are seasons and times and hours of greater and lesser opportunity. And I think it's very clear that we're in a season right now of far greater opportunity and need for evangelism, which is to say, finding God and sharing God, and like the definition you just read.
Right.
And it's also made the book of Acts in the Bible particularly pertinent to us. It's always pertinent, yes, but exceptionally so now, which is why we did last week's Tuesday unnamed thing as on Acts 2. And one of the scriptures that Embracing Evangelism really zeroed in on comes from Acts 8. I'll read that now if I could. It's the story of the Ethiopian eunuch meeting up with Philip and lives being changed. It goes like this. Acts 8, verses 26 to 31. Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Go south to the road, the desert road, that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza." So he started out, and on his way he met an Ethiopian eunuch. This man had gone to Jerusalem to worship, and on his way home was sitting in his chariot reading the book of Isaiah the prophet. The Spirit told Philip, "Go to that chariot and stay near it." Then Philip ran up to the chariot and heard the man reading Isaiah the prophet. "Do you understand what you are reading?" Philip asked. "How can I," he said, "unless someone explains it to me?" So he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. Whole lot there.
Oh, yeah. What I found really interesting when I was listening to you read that was Philip was sent by an angel, and yet when he got there, he didn't even know why he was going. He was just going where the angel told him to go. But then when he was by the chariot, the Spirit whispered to him, "Go to that chariot and stay with it." He had to be open to the voice of God embodied in the Holy Spirit. And there's a huge faith experience in being open to the Spirit in that way. So I love the way Philip is pushed and then opens himself to be able to be God's instrument in this situation.
And knowing that it is always the case that when we are open, we create our own environment, that we're going to be guaranteeing that more open people are around us. Clearly, the Ethiopian eunuch, he goes to Jerusalem. It's not even his culture or religion, but he went there to worship. This is a man also being guided by angels in spirit, and is open in the same way Philip is. So not surprising, right. Their openness, their mutuality on this topic gets them together. Like finds like every time. So openness cannot be overvalued or named as point one of evangelism.
Right. And Philip took an opportunity that presented itself to be an evangelist. He asked the man, "Do you understand what you're reading?" Now, the man's response could have easily been, "I don't think I need your help. Did I ask for your help? I don't think so. Go about your business." That happens sometimes, but that's not what happened this time. So we had Philip's openness meeting up with the eunuch's openness, and that's what the invitation came in. How can I, unless someone explains it to me, come on up here and let's sit together and let's talk. That's when we get those evangelism opportunities.
And there might have been another option, would have been the Ethiopian eunuch says, "Yeah, no, as a matter of fact, people in Ethiopia, there are a lot of, I happen to know a small group of people from Jerusalem, but they had already mentioned whatever, right. Jesus." And Philip going, "Oh yeah, tell me about it." Because when you're truly open, doesn't mean you always know. Truly open means also open to learning from. It's funny, I remember when we were doing Embracing Evangelism, I was reminded of the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, a text not many people have read, and that might be okay. But the guy has a really unique sense of humor. And I remember how open and funny Benjamin Franklin was about his own intellectual vanity. And he said it was an incredibly open and honest book about that he thought he was smarter than almost everybody. But that he learned, again, this was very self-effacing. I'm not making fun of him. He was making fun of himself. Yeah. He learned to at least to fake that he would go, what are your thoughts on the matter? And at first sort of like pretending that others might have something intelligent to say, he actually discovered that on occasion people did have illuminating and intelligent things to say, from which he learned, and then of course he concludes, which made me even smarter than ever.
Healthy ego, fake
modesty,
and then learning, which feeds the healthy ego. So it was a little symbiotic relationship there for Dr. Franklin. So this story, this is such a powerful story. It really does give us an entry point into the idea of evangelism, right? So with that in mind, let's try to unpack that definition of Episcopal evangelism. There are several parts to it. Remember what I said? We seek, name, and celebrate Jesus' loving presence. Let's start with seek. First of all, seek it's a verb, it's an action. We have to seek it. We have to look for it. We're curious. We want to learn new things. Just like Dr. Franklin, even though he might not have had the right mindset about it, he opened himself up to learning something. So there's an inherent curiosity in seeking, in wondering how Jesus might be showing up in other people's lives And from there, we might learn some ways that Jesus is active in our lives that we hadn't even noticed before. So
Definitely.
seeking is a huge part of this.
Frequently, that's the case.
Yeah, yeah. Second, we name it. Once we find that loving presence, we name it for the other person. When we say, "Hey, when you said that, it looks to me like that might be God acting in this way or that way," or I kind of feel that when you said that might have been the wind of the Spirit kind of pushing you in that direction, much like we saw with Philip being pushed by the Spirit to go to the chariot. It's a way of helping people who don't have sort of the same mindset that we have see God in new ways, just like Philip was able to do with the Ethiopian, saying, well, here's how that works. And then you have those aha moments that say, oh, I didn't know that was God. But now that you point that out to me, yeah, I can definitely see that might actually be God. And I never saw it that way before. So we give them sort of a new lens with which to look at their own story.
I want to weigh in too on this idea of naming. This is an enormous opportunity for potential evangelists to really get this right or not so much. And a lot of it has to do with the specifics of how we're speaking, how we're naming God. I find, that given what I do for a living, and I'm often in these conversations, and like you, with a huge range of people who are a great deal of faith and familiarity with Judeo-Christian terminology to almost none. I have found over the years, for instance, that saying, it's a God thing, might be a God thing. A lot of people are totally comfortable with that, in a way that it's time for you to get right with Jesus is not as effective. You hear the accusation, even my finger came out. And
right.
I actually think, but I'm going to be like Benjamin Franklin myself, I actually think everybody should get right with Jesus. But that's not where I start. That's not how I name it. That would burden people, frighten people. And frankly, I have to be honest enough to know, a lot of what I hear about Jesus in the world makes me disinterested in Jesus. And so my friends and these strangers, they live on the same planet I do. Why would I open with something that's going to shut down the conversation when I could be like Philip and go, hey, where can we find understanding in this?
Yeah, you look for that intersection of their story and God's story. That's part of the secret of this whole thing. We tell stories and we look at stories because our stories are a lens with which we can view the story, God's story. And that's what makes evangelism a little less scary. When we look at it that way, it's about using these stories to approach the story. But if you start with saying, I'm just going to introduce God to people, that's a daunting proposition. And that's going to make everybody just sort of blanch, because we've all seen that, that guy with the megaphone yelling at people that they're going to burn in hell if they don't do blah, 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 blah. That's not how you attract people to things.
I confess I do have a warm place in my heart for those megaphone people, but I do know, as Rick suggests, I'm a tiny minority. And this
Well, you want to debate them. That's
no. I just like the sound of it. I bask in it. But I do want to mention, let me name what we're dancing around here.
Yes.
Do not feel obligated by a connection to God that you have to be evangelizing often, or to think I should be fully prepared to be a very forceful evangelist. I should be Billy Graham by now. We might never ever. Do not be obligated by that sense of necessity, but instead a calmer, trusting sense of your season and when your opportunities to talk God are and are not. But without any sense that, okay, I've been going to church for 2 years now, I've got to start making believers. And that's in a lot of denominations. I've got to be a missionary now. Well, you might have been a missionary already for 2 years without even knowing it. And it might be you're just still being formed by Spirit. You're still being guided by angels. And you have not met the Ethiopian eunuch yet. And don't be in a rush. be happy with God's timing and seek that.
Right. So we seek the story, we name it when we find God in their story, and then we celebrate it. Because once the other person has had that sort of aha moment and says, oh, you're right, that was God acting in my life, I never saw it that way before, that's when we pause and we celebrate it and we say, wow, that's a wonderful thing. What a great gift to know that God was in fact acting in that person's life, in that story. So seek, name, and celebrate. Those are really powerful actions that can be part of evangelism. And notice, if you will, none of those things are inherently hard, are they?
No.
Really, all you're doing is you're listening to somebody else, but you're listening with a degree of intentionality. And you're using sort of those three metrics as a way to help you do that. So you seek, you name, and you celebrate. But what is it that you're celebrating? What are you seeking, naming, and celebrating? It's Jesus' loving presence in people's lives. We know as Christians that our lives have been changed forever by our experience of Jesus Christ and our walk with him through our lives. But not everybody has that same beginning point. There are folks who just feel that there's something missing in their life. They don't know what it is. And when you've sought, named, and celebrated with them, all of a sudden, they might see that God was acting in their life for the very first time. God has been there all along, but their recognition of it is a whole new thing. And that's going to give them something new to ponder and new to wonder about. It's in that act of sharing stories. Sharing stories is such a powerful thing. It's a gift to have someone share their story with you. And then it's a gift to share your story back with them. Stories really are the heart of evangelism. That's where it comes down from. We look at the biblical stories and we look at our own stories, and it's the intersection of those two that really help us to be evangelists. It's an off-putting term, but when you look at it merely as sharing stories with one another, it makes it a whole lot less scary. I think it does.
Indeed, yeah.
The last piece of it, this is the best part. The last piece of it is an invitation. You're inviting everybody to more. Well, what does more mean? More can mean a whole lot of things. More can mean more conversation. Invite someone to coffee. Invite them to lunch. Invite them to church. Share with them a book or a film. Father Chris is forever sharing films with me and giving me new lenses with which to look at films I've seen before.
Maybe too often.
Well, your tastes are a little eclectic, my friend. Sometimes I'm totally there with you. That Swedish film you gave me was unbelievably good.
As It Is in Heaven.
Oh my goodness. If you get a chance to see that film, As It Is in Heaven, wow. Anyway, we digress. But more can be a whole lot of different things. It can be come to church. It can be, I'm going to share with you a link to this very video, which is still an unnamed topic, but we'll get back to that. More is just that. It's more. So I hope that, my friends, this has given you a rekindled fire, if you will, to look at that spiritual practice that allows us to seek, name, and celebrate Jesus' loving presence in the stories of people, and then invite them to more.